This is exercise 206, changing the subject of a formula. Now, when we change the subject of the formula, for example, if we look at this equation here, V equals U plus AT, V is called the subject of the formula because it's on the left-hand side. We've got V equals U plus AT. So at the moment, V is the subject of the formula because it's on the left-hand side. So I might ask you to rearrange the equation and make U the subject of the formula. Or I could ask you to make A the subject of the formula or T the subject of the formula, meaning you'd need to rearrange this equation, for example, and have U equals whatever. Or I could, if A was the subject, it would be A equals, and I'd have to take everything else to the other side. Yes. So to change the subject of the formula to another variable, we use the same rules as for solving equations, okay? The answer will not be a number, but it will be another formula that you end up with. So let's look at, this is the 2017 HSC, and this question was in there, and it says make y the subject of the formula. So what we've got is x equals the square root of yp minus 1. So we want y on its own. What do you think is stopping you from touching anything on the right-hand side at the moment? The square root. So the square root sign, you can't go moving the 1 or anything like that because there's the square root sign is, you know, surrounding all of that. So we need to do the inverse operation of square root, which is squaring. So what we do is we square both sides. So when you square both sides, what happens to the left? What do you get? So what we're really doing is squaring both sides. Do you remember last lesson how I showed you something like this? I showed you, for example, what's the square root of 9? 3. And if I square it. So the square root of 9 is 3. And 3 squared is, do you remember this? Square root of 9 is 3. 3 squared is 9. So a square root and a squared are inverse operations and they cancel each other out. So here, if I want to undo the square root, its inverse operation is squared. So what I do is I square both sides, okay? I start with what I had. I square both sides. The square root and the squared cancel. And I end up with x squared equals yp take away 1. Now I want y to be the subject of the formula. What should I move next? Yep, the minus 1. So I've got x squared, inverse operation of minus 1 is plus 1. What we are really doing is adding 1 to both sides, but it just shows up on the left. Now, what the y is attached to a p with what sort of symbol? With a times. So the inverse operation of multiplying by, I'm trying to make y on its own. So this is y times p. The inverse operation of times p is divide by p. And what you're really doing is dividing both sides by p. And it's done. That y is now the subject of that formula. So the same operations as for solving equations with numbers. Same opposite. The inverse operation of adding is subtracting. The inverse operation of square root is squared. The inverse operation of times is divide. Okay? The only time we square both sides is if the last thing left on one side is a square root. So we had x is the square root. There's no other numbers above it, below it, or anything like that, or next to it. Square root's the first thing that needs to go. Okay? All right, let's look at the next one. Which of the following correctly expresses Q as the subject of this formula? So I'm going to rewrite the question out. E equals IR plus Q over C. All right, I need to make Q the subject. All right. No, ladies, Q is definitely, see, that's a Q divided by C. You know that IR, it's like something on its own. It needs to go. You know this IR, you treat it as a number on its own. You know how, see this, it's just IR plus that. So we don't want to get rid of the divide by C yet. The only time we get rid of this divide by C is when divide by C is the last thing left on that side. So you would move the IR over. Now, is this a plus IR or a minus IR? Yeah, so what's the opposite of plus IR? Minus IR. So I'm picking up this IR, and this is Q over C plus IR. This would be like a 5. What was if this was a 5 and that was a 7? Wouldn't you go 7 minus 5?
Don't you do times or first?
Do the inverse operation of dividing by C is I've got this thing here. And when you've got terms separated by plus or minus, you should move them first. So this IR needs to go first. Now, if I want to get Q on its own, I just need to undo the divide by C. What's the inverse operation of divide by C? It's times C, but the whole of the other side is multiplied by C. Okay? Now, you'll notice that in the solutions, in the multiple choice answers, there are no brackets, so we need to expand this, and we get CE minus CIR equals Q. Now, if you want to do the inverse operation of dividing by C first, I can show you how to do that as well. But I would definitely see any terms that can be picked up and taken over with the other terms should go together. The other way of doing this, do you remember how last lesson we learnt about if you had more than one fraction, you can multiply everything by C to undo this divide by C, or no? If you decided to get rid of that C first, right, and you're deciding to multiply by C, you have to multiply both sides by C. Are you okay with that? You'd have to multiply, yeah? So if I do it this other way, has everyone got this down? The other way is to multiply everything, multiply through by C. Now, if I want to multiply through by C, it would be C times this equals C times that. Do you remember? Plus C times that. It's like when we were doing two fractions the other lesson. If you want to undo the divide by C, the problem doing it this way is that you've got, this is why I took the IR over. It's much better. You would have to do it this way. So I would stick with the way that I did it first. I think this is more complicated for you. All right, so this is more complicated for you. I would definitely do it the first way. So, do you know why I've done it this way? Anything without a fraction, put it together. How about that? Ladies, the two terms that aren't fractions go together on the left. How about that? And then you undo your fraction. This is anything without fractions you would put together. Do you understand? In normal equations, that would be like the numbers on their own. So the IR and the E are both not fractions. Put them together on one side and leave the fraction on its own on the other side. We've done that before, things like that. And then you undo your divide by C. All right, what about the next one? We want to make R the subject of the next formula. All right, girls, you should know what to get rid of first. I need to make R the subject. What is stopping me from doing anything at the moment? At the moment, forget moving M's and pi's. A square root sign is covering all of this. The square root sign is the thing that's encompassing everything on the right. The square root has to go first. So, inverse operation of squaring is, what is it? So we square root both sides. Sorry, we square both sides. The opposite of squaring, square both sides, sorry. So we're going to square both sides. So we've got V squared is this squared. Now remember the square root and the squared cancel, and I'm left with V squared equals MR divided by pi. Now, okay, let's undo it. MR divide by pi, the inverse operation of dividing by pi is timesing by pi. And now I need the R on its own. What is the R attached to the M with? Because I can't see a plus, minus, or divide. It's a times. The inverse operation of multiplying by M is dividing by M. So we divide by M. Now instead of writing V squared times pi, I can just write V squared pi divide by M. Okay? Wait, I need to make this a bit bigger. Okay, ladies. So, we've got a few rules. Square root is the only thing left on that side. It's covering everything else. Inverse operation of squared. The question before, two things just on their own. They're not fractions. Put them together, all right, before you undo your other fraction. 13 HSC question 21. Which equation correctly shows R as the subject? We've got S equals 800, 1 minus R. Now, there are a few ways we can do this. What would you like to do, ladies? You can take the 800 over first. I'm going to show you two methods for doing this. The first one, this is S equals 800. What symbol is between the 800 and the bracket? Times. So this is S is 800 times 1 minus R. So if I decide to move the 800 over, the 800 is attached to the 1 minus R with a times. How do I take it over? Add, subtract, multiply, or divide? I divide. So I've got S over 800 equals the bracket 1 minus R. Now, I probably wouldn't do it this way if I were you. This is going to be very tricky. The problem is, I wouldn't, girls, now what are you going to do? I wouldn't do it this way. There is another way, and I think it's best that you use the other way, but I'm going to need to take the minus R over to the other side and bring the S over 800 over. It's so much more complicated doing it this way. I'm going to leave that for a sec. I'm going to show you something else. I think you should expand first, girls. I think you should expand. Let's expand the right-hand side. Much easier. S equals, can we expand? What do you get? 800 minus 800R. You have no fractions to deal with. Your life will be a lot easier. Remember, we're trying to get this R on its own. Look, see how this is minus 800R? I think we should take the minus 800R over and bring this S over there. You know how we're trying to make R the subject? All right, don't worry. What do you want to do next? What do you want to do next? What do you want to move? I would take the minus 800R over and you get plus 800R. Keep the 800 here. What happens with this S when I take it over? Do you know why I'm taking that minus 800R to the left? Because I don't want a minus in front of the R. I'm trying to make R the subject. What do I do with the S? Come on. Minus S. So I've taken the minus, inverse operation of minus 800R is plus 800R. Keep the 800 here and take the S over. Do you know why I did that? I want R to be the subject, and at the moment it's minus 800R. I don't want a negative in front of the R. I don't want a minus in front of the R. Otherwise you're going to be dividing by negative 800 later. And that's going to cause you more problems. All right, what would you do next? If this was plus 800R, I would have left the 800R on the right. What do I do now? I want R on its own. What do I do? Come on, help me. Well, no. Yes, but how? This is R times 800. How do I get rid of this 800? Divide. So it's 800 minus S over 800. Question, E equals MC squared plus P. This obviously is some physics equation. We need to make C the subject. C the subject. Okay, what are you going to do? What will you move first? The P. See, this is like a plus 5 or something. This plus P is going. So what do we write? E minus P equals MC squared. What should we do next? I'm trying to keep C on its own. We move the M. There is a times. Don't worry about the squared yet. We're moving the M. The inverse operation of timesing M. The M and the C squared are attached with the times. Opposite of times M is divide by M. Now I still need to get C on its own. This is where we do. Now, what is the inverse operation of squared? Square root. See, you don't do the square root until the squared is the last thing that's stopping you from moving anywhere. Just like when we had the square root before, we don't do anything until it's the only thing left on that side. So I don't want you square rooting first step. It doesn't go, you're not allowed to square root until you've just got something squared on its own. It's the last step, it's holding you up. So inverse operation of squared is square root. But when you take the square root of a number, girls, just looking over here, if I've got that x squared is 4, can you tell me what x could be, please? What times what is 4? 2 and negative 2. I'll just show you now. If you've got that something squared is 4, x could be 2 or negative 2. I'll show you why. Because 2 times 2 is 4, but negative 2 times negative 2 is also 4. So when we square root something, you need to take plus or minus square root. So looking over here, we've got c squared equals e minus p over m. So c is plus or minus. You must not just do square root of the other side. You must do plus or minus the square root of the other side. The reason we do plus or minus the square root of the other side is what I've just shown you here. That if x squared is 4, x could be, it's 2 times 2 is 4, but negative 2 times negative 2 is also 4. So the next step from something squared is x is plus or minus the square root of 4, which is plus or minus 2. So here, this is why you see the plus or minus. Okay? So the inverse, you don't just do square root of the other side. You must put plus or minus in front of the square root. Because a negative times a negative is a positive, and a positive times a positive is a positive. That's the reason. I've got the inverse operation of squared is plus or minus square root. We need to express A, the subject of this formula. This is another physics formula. S equals ut plus a half at squared. We want A to be the subject. What do we move first? Can you sort of just see something on its own that could go to the other side? Ladies? The ut. Remember, ut is just u times t, two numbers that could be multiplied together just to give another number. There's no fractions involved with ut. Take it over. So, is it going to be plus or minus? S minus ut equals a half at squared. Remember, we're trying to make A the subject. Now, I want to rewrite this. Do you think the 2 is on the denominator or the numerator? Here, with the half. Yes, it's S equals ut plus at squared over 2. Are we okay with that? I want to, when we've got fractions involved, I need to clearly identify what is on the numerator and what is on the denominator. A half at squared means 1 times at squared divided by 2. The 2 is on the denominator. Now, let's move this 2. The inverse operation of dividing by 2 is, ladies? Multiplying by 2, but it's 2 bracket S minus ut equals at squared. Before you go and expand, have a quick look at your answers and notice the answer for A has not been expanded. I'm not going to expand this. I'm just going to leave it like this. So inverse operation of divide by 2 is timesing by 2. I'm not going to expand and write 2s minus 2ut. What is the next thing that needs to go? I'm trying to make A the subject. What should move now? Trying to get A on its own. At the moment it's A times t squared. I can just take the t squared on its own. Girls, I'm not making t the subject. I don't need square roots. I just need to move the t squared because it's connected to the A. So it'll be 2 bracket S minus ut divided by t squared is A. And that's it. And again, the answer is A. Jeez. We want x to be the subject of this equation. So what do we get rid of first? Nx divide by 5. The inverse operation of divide by 5 is 2 times 5. So the inverse operation of divide by 5 is times 5. All right, now we just want to get the x on its own. What do we do next? So I've got 5a equals nx. What do I do? I want the x on its own. How's it attached? With a times. Opposite of inverse operation of times n is divide by n. So I'll divide by n. 5a over n equals x. Okay? Oh, well, it's b this time. N, the subject of this formula. So I've got v equals 3m n squared divided by r. I need to make n the subject. Okay, don't touch the n. Move everything else. What's going to go first? Let's read it. 3m n squared divide by r. What goes first? V divide by r. Inverse operation of divide by r is times r. Oops, 3m n squared. What's going to go next? You can take the 3m together. Really, I would look at this like this. That really is 3m times n squared. Are you okay? The 3m can be together. Move the whole thing. What are you going to do? What do you think we do to get n on its own, or the n squared on its own? It's 3m times n squared. That's what that really is. I'm going to divide by 3m. Now I'm up to my last step. N squared is VR over 3m. That means, so my last operation is to undo the squared, but when you undo a squared, or the inverse operation of squared is plus or minus square root. But you're lucky, it's got it in the answers anyway. So therefore n is plus or minus the square root of VR over 3m. So the inverse operation of squared is plus or minus square root. Is that a again? Yes. Got to do plus or minus the square root of the whole of the other side. The a, notice the square root sign does not cover the denominator. So that is a real, so just watch out for that. It's D. Girls? Which of the following correctly expresses T as the subject? Now, you know how before I made you multiply through? This time I'm not going to make you multiply through. You know why? Look at all the answers, how the fractions are separated from the whole numbers. Do you see that? Fraction, whole number, etc. I'm not going to make you multiply through by 2 pi. So in one of the other questions, someone wanted to just divide by that 800 in that question. Do you remember? What are we going to do here? I would divide by 2 pi in this case. I wouldn't expand it, otherwise you're not going to see one of those answers. So, can we divide by 2 pi first? I'll tell you why. Because see how the answers, well, I don't know, you can, it's up to you what you do. I'd divide by 2 pi. That's what I'd probably do. Divide by 2 pi. Yeah. Because it's 2 pi times that. No, why? You wouldn't do that. All right. All right. If you want, look. If we want, let's expand. All right. I'm going to do it 2 ways. All right. Let's divide by 2 pi. How about that? I think this is going to be a nightmare too. And I think you're better. You should have just divided by pi. You know why? Look at all the answers, everyone. Actually, no, you're right. Look at all the answers. B divided by pi. B divided by pi. B divided by pi. Can you see that? So, we're not going to divide by 2 pi. We're going to divide by pi. That means that the 2 stays there. Are you okay with that? I'll tell you why. All right, or we can expand. You know what? Expand. All right, I'll divide by pi. Divide by pi, keep the rest, the 2 there. Now, the only reason we're doing that is because we're looking at all the multiple choice answers and it's not divided by 2 pi. Can you see? B divided by pi, B divided by pi, B divided by pi. I know this is B divided by 4 pi, but we're hoping one of the answers will be A, B, or C. Now, Because I could divide by pi, or I could just divide by 2, or I could divide by 2 pi. What do you think we should do next? Maybe expand? Let's expand now. The right-hand side. What do you get? 2r. What do you get here when you do 2 times t over 2? You do get t, but 2 times t over 2, you end up with just t. It's like 2 times half t. So I've done 2 times r and 2 times that. That gives me b over pi equals 2r plus t. We're nearly done. Now what do? I want t to be the subject, and we just subtract 2r from both sides. This is what we would have got. b equals 2 pi r, if I expand, plus 2 pi t over 2. Are you okay with that? If we expanded, which is b equals 2 pi r plus pi t. Now, we need to make t the subject. This is tricky too. What's attached? This is tricky as well. What's attached to the t that needs to go? So you've got to divide everything by pi, but you've got to divide everything by pi. So it's b divided by pi equals 2 pi r divided by pi plus t. That is dividing. If you want to divide by pi, the problem is there are 3 things. You've got to divide everything by pi. This is bad this way too. The pi's cancel, and you're left with, and then you just take the 2r over. This is the other way. b over pi minus 2r equals t. But the trick there is, your other option is to move the 2 pi r over before you divide by t. Would you prefer that? So you're okay to divide everything by pi. If you're dividing by pi, if you decide to divide by pi, you've got to divide both sides by pi. So that's the other way you could have done it. Okay, in the next question, we're making q the subject of this formula. What do we do first? Don't touch this. What's going to move? Anything with pluses or minuses. What am I going to move first? Everyone, have a look at your answers. Have a look at your answers. What do you think they did first? Look at the 4p. What's next to it? Right. What are you going to do first? Yeah, we minus 5t. Because these terms are separated with pluses or minuses. So the opposite of plus 5t is minus 5t. That one goes first. Sometimes have a quick look and see. But look, this is on its own, this is on its own. Pick it up. You're trying to get everything away from the q. This 5t's got nothing to do with this 2q squared. Take it over. What happens next? So everyone, whenever you take something to the other side, you always put it at the back. Now, the next thing is, I'm trying to get q on its own, but I've got 2 times q squared. Opposite or inverse operation of timesing by 2 is to divide by 2. So the 2 needed to go. Now, right, last thing is squared. Remember, we don't go and do any squareds until it's the last thing left on that side. What is the inverse operation of squared? You have to do plus or minus the square root of the entire other side, not just the numerator and denominator. Be careful. We can automatically wipe out a and b. Do you know why? The square root doesn't take the whole side. So what's the answer? C or D? The square root is plus or minus the square root of the whole of the other side. It's D. Because C is the wrong way around. It's 4p minus 5t, not 5t minus 4p. 4p minus 5t. Make L the subject. In other words, L's got to stay there. You take everything else over. This is 2 pi times L squared. Yes or no? So, this times 2 pi needs to go. Inverse operation of times 2 pi is divide by 2 pi. Now, Remember, you don't get rid of the squared until it's the last thing left on that side. The inverse operation of squared is what? Plus or minus the square root of the other side. Now, if you don't put the plus or minus, you lose a mark. Yes. That if something squared is something else, if you want the L on its own, you must take plus or minus the square root of the other side for the reason I've just shown you here. If x squared is, say, 25, yes, we all know that x could be 5, but x also could be negative 5, because a negative times a negative is a positive. So you must take plus or minus the square root of the other side.